Let me tell you an incredible secret that great generals know and most 40k players don't. You actually don't attack to destroy the enemy, you attack to manipulate. The Mongols actually use this constantly. They'd charge the front line, they'd fire a few arrows, and then they would retreat. Not because they were losing, but because they wanted the enemy to chase, break formation, and expose their flanks. The attack wasn't about damage, it was about forcing bad decisions. Now, 40,000 works exactly the same way. In Warhammer 40k, your charges, your shooting, your trades, they really shouldn't be about dice. They should actually be about putting your opponent in a position where every single choice is the wrong choice. And that's what war theory is. Now, I'm going to give you 5 questions that are going to let you control the game like a real freaking general. So let's get into it. In this video, we're breaking down those 5 critical questions that competitive players will use to make smart combat decisions on the table. If you implement this advice, you will immediately level up your gameplay. We're going to talk about when to fight. We're going to talk about when not to fight. We'll talk about how to force bad choices on your opponent, how to think 2 turns ahead of your opponent. Guys, there's so much stuff, and you are going to so improve from this video if you're struggling with these things. So let's just jump right onto it. What's the first question? Let's say we're set up for the charge phase. Your units are behind cover, your opponent is defending objectives. You need to ask yourself the question, actually, probably even before the charge phase. In your command phase, you need to be asking yourself this question. Is this the turn that I go in? Is this the turn that I'm charging my opponent? You're going to ask yourself the question, what happens if I go in? When you ask yourself this question, you're going to realize some fundamental truths. Charging is a multi-purpose tool. It's not just for killing. We have to figure out what is the goal of our charge. And because I will tell you right now, they've got several listed here, but I'll go a little bit more into detail. You might actually charge a unit just so they can't do an action next turn. You might charge a unit not to destroy them, but simply to reduce the threat of that unit. So I know a lot of people are really hot on Victrix Guard right now. They're like, oh, but if you charge with a 200-point unit, you won't even wipe the whole squad. So what's the point? Well, the point might be maybe you don't kill 6 Victrix Guard, but you kill 4 of them. And then suddenly there's only 2 left. And those 2 left don't have enough punching power to have a dramatic effect on the rest of the battle. So sometimes it's about deplenishing forces and not necessarily wiping units. So you can reduce enemy threat output. Maybe sometimes we actually make the charge, not because we're going to try to kill anything. I charge my tanks all the time simply to force my opponent to not be able to shoot, right? Because if you're infantry, you can't shoot into combat unless with very, very limited exceptions. You can force bad movement via pylons, consolidations, etc. So if I am charging into a really horrifyingly overpowered melee unit, okay? Let's say I am charging into a big unit of exalted, or not even, actually just normal 8-pound. Let's say I'm charging into a big unit of normal 8-pound. But I very strategically and cleverly place a bunch of non-threatening and relatively useless units closer to the individual models of that unit. That's going to force that unit to actually make a pile-in towards the closest model, not necessarily the model that I'm planning on attacking with. So on the swing back, they're not going to be able to swing back a whole bunch. So I can actually tie these units up with relatively non-threatening units that can actually cause a huge impact on the battle, because then this big unit of 8-pound aren't going to be eligible to charge in their turn because they're still going to be engaged in combat because they weren't able to focus their attacks because of the way I forced them to pile in and consolidate. You can even block movement lanes. I have done charges where I've specifically used my charge to get my body in a certain position that makes it so that my opponent can't move through a certain movement lane. This is a very, very important thing. Charging can set up your move blocks. You can use your charges to contest and steal objectives. You don't necessarily even need to destroy anything that you charge, even if they are a combat threat. But if you can out-OC them with your charge, now you have denied them primary, and as we all know, primary is the key to winning games. Scoring secondaries by positioning, you might need to charge in order to get yourself the engage on all fronts or the behind enemy lines. And then lastly, we might set up charges in order to force opponents overcommitments. So let's say I send out something not necessarily super powerful, but something that's just tough to deal with. Take a unit of Deathwing Knights, for example. I might charge a unit of Deathwing Knights out to my opponent. And it's not that they're the most threatening unit. I mean, they hit kind of hard, but it's nothing super spectacular. But what it might do is force your opponent to bring way too more things to actually deal with them than what they wanted to, which means they're exposing a dramatic amount of their force. So we always got to ask ourselves, why are we going in? And very, very way too often, players of Warhammer 40,000 think that the answer has to be to destroy the thing I'm charging. But there's so many more options. And if you charge with the correct intention, it doesn't matter if you destroy your opponent because you're still going to be accomplishing your goals. Now, what's the next question? What happens if I don't go in? This is a really, really big one. Sometimes waiting will win your game. I know I have lost games on stream when I've been teaching, which has been a little embarrassing, but it happens. It happens to everyone, where I have actually charged my units out a turn too early. It's like, I have to go destroy my opponent this turn. But because I sent my vital units out too early, I end up losing the game. So sometimes waiting and forcing your opponent to actually come a little bit closer to you, or to get just a slightly different secondary draw or whatever, is going to be the key to actually having better engagements that have a more dramatic positive impact on the game. If you wait, you can avoid being countercharged. What if there's a fairly juicy target, but if you charge into it, your opponent's Death Star is going to charge you next turn, or even Heroic Intervene. Sometimes by waiting when your opponent is poised to strike, you can kind of force your opponents into a dead turn. This is actually a strategy that works really, really well against orcs a lot of times. Sometimes orcs will position themselves very, very aggressively, hoping that you charge into them when they don't have the wall up, because then you're going to just like hit their trucks, hit some things that they don't really care about, and then they'll wah, and then they'll pour out and charge into all the things that are right in front of their lines. But if you don't take that bait and you just wait a turn, many, many times you can force your opponent to wah when they're not prepared, when they are not positioned to take advantage of it. So, dead turns are things that you can set up by waiting to charge. You can delay engagement to align with scoring spikes. Basically, think of it like, all right, you're going to have to go into your opponent. But on this turn, the secondaries that you drew are not aligned with that mission. Maybe the secondaries you drew are a sabotage and a recover assets. Whereas the next turn, the secondaries you draw is going to be tempting target and area denial, right? So you can see how sometimes the secondaries can help encourage when your turn to go is. So I always want you guys to consider if fighting now will lose primary in the next turn. So you always have to be extremely cautious about what happens if you do go in, what happens if you don't go in. If you don't go in, do you force your opponent to screen for an extra turn, for example, which can mess up all of his movements? So these are questions we have to ask ourselves. Number 3, what does my opponent really want me to do? Strong players in Warhammer 40,000 bait charges or shooting. I am notorious for this. I am notorious for very intentionally leaving an angle for my opponent to shoot me. But if my opponent wants to shoot me from that angle, then they're going to have to stand in a very disadvantageous place for them to do that. Same thing with a charge. Oh, you can charge me, but if you do, you're about to get countercharged, or you're about to get whatever. So you have to watch that. Is your opponent asking you? Is your opponent hoping you make that critical charge? Weak positioning can be intentional. I am living proof of this. I'm notorious for this. So you also have to be aware of screens, right? So if your opponent puts his weak troops in front and you collapse into his weak troops, well, he might not care if his weak troops die, because then he's just going to hit you with his hammers afterwards. CP bank may be a trap. What does this mean? Well, if it's the turn where you're ready to engage in combat and your opponent has 5 CP, what you got to understand is, oh crap, 2 of those CP are going to be on fight on death. So the first unit that you charge, he's going to fight on death with. Then he's going to spend 2 CP in order to combat interrupt so that he fights next. So he might actually be able to pick up 2 of your units where you only pick up 1 of his units on your turn. And then maybe he's got an extra CP for, -1 to be wound, or crits on fire, or something like that. So you got to watch their CP bank, because that can sometimes tell you their plans on what they're hoping to accomplish in your turn. Deep strike angles can rely on your overextension. Sometimes when they make you go a little bit too forward, that opens up your back lines for them to deep strike, or worse, rapid ingress. So if they are wanting you to charge into them, reconsider. This is the theory of war. Can I force a bad choice on them? I love this question. Good moves in this game destroy units, but great moves are going to destroy options. That is so beautiful. A lot of times, what I like to do is when I go on out, I will put my opponent in a scenario where they have to choose between destroying my threats or killing my crap and getting points. Because if they kill some of my crap to gain points, then all of my threats are alive to collapse on them. If they go kill my threats, then all of my crap, which is, say, holding OC, getting out OCing them, setting positions for secondaries, will end up winning me the game because I have too many victory points. So you want to force them to make bad choices. Do I kill the weak stuff that doesn't matter? Or do I kill the weak stuff that is scoring all the points while the strong stuff is about to destroy me? See how it is? Um, Tagging people in combat. So after you make your charge, you kill your initial unit, your consolidation, always try to consolidate, especially into those monsters and vehicles and those shooting units. You have to force them to consider, oh crap, do I need to fall back with this unit to make sure that I save my unit? Do I need to just hopefully survive so that I can just shoot into combat with them, etc. All these things. You can make ignoring units lose them points. We kind of already discussed that. Like if I put a bunch of like trash on one of his objectives, he has to choose, do I actually dedicate shots or charges into this trash to kill it, or do I put those shots into the more threatening units? So every single move that you want to do on the battlefield should be narrowing your opponent's choices for how they're going to pull out the win. Then the last question you need to ask yourself in your command phase when you're prepping for the turn, you need to ask yourself, how does this fight change next turn when you're planning your fights for the turn? So you want to think 2 turns ahead. Winning now may actually lose next turn scoring. So maybe if I go and charge and destroy his big unit, that might be really, really nice because I get rid of his big unit. But then I don't have anything on my own objective to actually score in the next turn, right? This is something that happens all the time in people who overcommit. I know just from my own experience, this happened to me when I was playing at the World Championships on my 5th game. I threw the game early on because I dedicated the lion out too early. I should have had the lion holding back because the fight that he went into, like, it was nice to destroy the things that he destroyed, but then it gave my opponent the opportunity to kill my lion. Had I held the lion back a turn, it would have forced my opponent to screen the entire board for an extra turn, which would have given me the ability to collapse all of my forces on him all at once. So by winning that fight that I took, I actually ended up scoring less and losing the game. So had I waited, then I would have forced him into a position to try to counter my teleports, etc., and then I would have basically just 100% won. So this is because I made a poor decision. All right, losing intentionally may set up stronger plays. Sometimes opponents are totally okay to make a bad trade. For me, I don't mind sending a unit that costs more points than the target unit that I'm going into, even though I know that if I dedicate my stronger unit, I know I'm going to lose my stronger unit. For an example, let's say I have a unit of Deathwing Knights, 250 points, and I am going to charge them into a unit of Blade Guard Veterans, 170 points. My Deathwing Knights killed the Blade Guard Veterans. I know for a fact that my opponent is now going to destroy my Deathwing Knights. But the amount of forces it might take them to destroy my Deathwing Knights might be really advantageous for me, because that might mean that he doesn't also have the ability to send those forces to other places to contest my primary, because he really has to focus on destroying those Deathwing Knights now. So I don't care that I trade down in points because of what else it does to the battlefield. So then you also got to ask yourself the questions. What happens if my unit survives? What happens if my unit dies? If my unit dies when I don't expect it to, does that throw the game for me? These are really, really important questions you always need to be asking yourself, because if you have, let's say, a 70% chance of survival when you charge into your opponent, and if you survive, great, they're tied up, they can't fall back and shoot, they can't do all these things, and they're not going to score primary. That's awesome. But what if the 30% chance happens and you die? Does that automatically lose you the game? Well, in that case, then you won't be able to do the charts. So you have to see what happens in the future when you make your decisions, okay? So guys, listen, remember, in this game, we're not trying to destroy our opponents. We're trying to destroy their options. And that is war theory in Warhammer 40,000. If you have more questions, if you like advice like this, make sure you join the Happy Crumping Wargaming Discord. Join as a member, and we'll talk about theory all the freaking time. I love you all. Have a great freaking day. Crump on. Bye-bye.